I'm Mason President Gregory Washington, welcoming you to our Future Transformed, a series of conversations with Mason's leading experts about solutions to the grand challenges of today and tomorrow. Joining us is Laurie Robinson, Professor Emeritus at Mason and former Clarence J. Robinson Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society. The two-time former Assistant U.S. Attorney General is here to talk to us about building greater trust between law enforcement and citizens and applying science to policing. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
After Michael Brown was killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, you were appointed by President Barack Obama as co-chair of the White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And I think you were on that task force with then Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey. Right. So the task force made 59 recommendations for police reform, and it had a significant impact. As your own research showed, 40% of the nation's largest police departments changed their training and use of force policies in the 2 years after the report's release. And so that was a significant outcome. Why then did you and Charles Ramsey reconvene the task force in 2023?
Mr. President, we reconvened the group in early February this year after the tragic death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis, because we felt that despite all of the police departments around the country that have made changes based on our report and other recommendations, that there has not been enough broad action from what we would call the whole of government and the whole of communities to address this, that there are still many things, including problems of poverty, of racism, of systemic society-wide issues that need to be addressed. And we thought, let's get the wise heads on our task force together and see what we can do to address these issues.
This is really interesting that you would say that as a follow-up to the previous question we had. So talk a little bit about what did the evidence say? So you convene this entity in 2014, have this tremendous impact, have change, real change. Yep. Then you reconvene in 2023. Did the evidence substantiate that there had been no change, or that things had gotten worse, or that things had gotten better?
Well, that's a really good question. We have a lot of evidence that within police departments that any number of them have adopted particular suggestions of changes in policy and practice that we recommended. They've eliminated chokeholds, they've changed no-knock warrants, they've done particular things and changed use of force policies, as you alluded to, just to cite some specific examples. But what we had not reckoned with, I think, sufficiently was the setting in which the police departments are operating. And what needs to happen is what we call whole of government and whole of community approach, to recognize that where you have communities facing a lot of poverty and facing systemic racism from the past, as an example, that there is a natural conflict there if they feel there's over-policing and harm occurring from that.
You once said, as it relates to crime, that the more we rely on evidence rather than just emotion, the greater the positive impact we will have. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was perhaps not the most artful way to have said it. It was a quote that I gave in a podcast that I did this past year. And I think the gist of it is that we shouldn't be acting emotionally. We should be acting based on evidence and based on science. And I'll go back, Mr. President, to just a quick anecdote about when I was first working in criminal justice. I was working for the American Bar Association many decades back when I was a young person coming into the field. And I went to cover a hearing in the US Senate about criminal justice, and I thought, I'm really going to learn a lot from what the senators raised. It was about the federal criminal code and about reforms. And I sat there, I was taking notes and really excited about what I would learn. And one senator said to the other, well, here's what I think we should do. And he said, my brother-in-law once had a case, and such and such and such and such. And I thought, is that the way they come to make decisions? Because of some random case that came up? And I've always remembered that, even though it was many decades back. And it made me start really thinking about how do we come to policy decisions? And from that, and obviously over a number of years, I really focused more and more on how we make decisions and the importance of evidence and research and science in informing both policy and practice in criminal justice. And when I was in the Justice Department later with Janet Reno during the Clinton administration, and then with Eric Holder in the Obama years, I made this connection between science and policy and practice a very high priority. And particularly in the Obama administration, Eric Holder was a very big supporter of this initiative with me. And we set up a What Works clearinghouse in the Justice Department that still exists today, so that practitioners, whether it's police or judges or probation officers or anyone else, can just go there, or students here at Mason, to say what works in addressing domestic violence, or what works in reducing juvenile justice recidivism, and find out what we know from research.
So does this task force have an official status?
Well, that's a really good question. No, we had no official status. However, interestingly, the Domestic Policy Council in the White House has not once but twice asked us for briefings. In fact, we just did one yesterday.
Outstanding, outstanding. Mm-hmm. So my understanding is there are 8 recommendations, and of the 8, which is the most important?
Well, the first one is actually the most important because it talks about the need to change the mission of policing from simply reducing crime to a broader one of community safety.
That is a significant outcome, to say the least, right? Because it kind of changes the fundamental mission
yes.
of the police force.
Right, and it has to be done in concert with the entire community and in concert with education and public health and housing, et cetera.
Now, the report does not lay all the blame on police practices, right? You call for addressing the underlying drivers of crime yes. and call on the federal government to support community-based organizations and local and state governments yes. in creating safe communities.
Yes.
Even so, why do you believe the nation remains, as the task force report says, stuck when it comes to fixing policing? Well,
there are some other issues involved here. And one of the most significant ones, and we address this in the report, is the culture of policing. And we do talk in the report about the need to address that culture, that the culture needs to be one much more about a culture of guardians of the community rather than warriors. I mean, there's a place for warrior culture, which is if you're dealing with terrorists, dealing with a violent drug gang, but the essence of the culture has to be about protectors of the community. And that actually goes back to Plato's vision of protectors of democracy. So that's one point. But a second point which goes to the organization of our government, and that is that in our country, we have 18,000 police departments. We are completely decentralized in our system. And by contrast, the United Kingdom has 35 police departments. It's completely centralized, and it's all, if they wanted in the Home Secretary's office in London to change the policy on use of force, they could issue an edict on a Friday, today, and on Monday, they could have that policy issued and out and do the training on Tuesday.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
I'll tell you a quick anecdote. Back in the 90s, I represented Attorney General Janet Reno at a conference in Germany, and it related to training on weapons of mass destruction, looking ahead to terrorism issues. And I reported how it was proving difficult to do that kind of training and reach state and local police chiefs. And a German ministry head came up to me afterwards and kind of scolded me. Why in the world doesn't Janet Reno just order all of the police chiefs in America to take this training? And I said to him, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but she can't order any police chief in America to take this training from the local level. Well, this was a big blustery guy, and he blustered at me. Well, I don't understand, blah, 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 blah. And I said, every local police department is completely independent. Well, in these very centralized governments, they just don't understand that kind of thing.
Oh, I understand it. I understand it. So when we look at what's happening in many communities in America today, there is a fundamental lack of trust
Yes.
between the police and the communities they support.
Yes.
And so how can this trust be reestablished? And what should individual private citizens do to facilitate that?
Yes, no, that's a really good question. Establishing trust, as we think about it, is all about communication and honesty, openness and accountability. And basically that's about communication. And I have seen the successful police chiefs who have done this, especially if there's been a bad situation, go into a community and then regularly start going out and not just talking, but listening, doing a huge amount of listening. And it can't be solely with, let's say, a group of older ministers who are not going to talk in a difficult way to him or her. It's got to be talking to young people, to unhappy people, to a whole range of individuals who've lived in that community and are happy, unhappy, angry. And it's also not one and done. You don't just do it once. You do it over and over and over. Part of it as well is to acknowledge the problems that the police have contributed to. That's really, really important. I've heard a number of chiefs say that. And in fact, with our initial task force back in 2015, we took a lot of testimony around the country, and we heard from chiefs who said they had gone out into the community when they started and done that, acknowledged what that department had done to erode trust.
Understood, understood. What do you say to those who want to defund the police?
Well, I think I understand the frustration, and I think the defunding conversation has led to some good conversations about reimagining policing. I don't agree with just abolishing police departments. I think that we need protection. I think that policing needs to do a job, as going back to the earlier conversation, about protecting the community but not harming it. And so we have to kind of start with what policing needs to be, back to the original conversation about the mission.
Well, we thank you for that. And now I want to open it up to all of you. Any questions here for Professor Robinson?
Hi there. Professor, thank you for your time today. My home locality of Prince William County a couple years back ended their partnership between their local police and ICE, citing community concerns over police involvement with immigration law. What do you believe the ideal role for police should be regarding immigration and immigration law enforcement?
My view is that in the past, at least, this was not handled well. So I would be wary as a local police chief, if I were a local police chief, in reestablishing that kind of relationship. I think if ICE were handling that in a fair fashion, as opposed to running into, as they were at that time, running into courthouses to grab people and that kind of thing, that I would consider it. But back on the theme of working in partnership with the community, it did not seem like a good alliance. So I'd have to have a lot of assurances before I signed the paperwork.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much for being here. One of my questions is, I remember you talked about one of your solutions being centralizing police stations. Do you think that's currently politically possible, because much of the government seems to be concerned about states' rights and local communities tending to govern themselves?
So you're saying to combine different police departments?
Yeah, do you think that's possible with the current political state? Or
no, I don't. So I wasn't suggesting that our system is bad. It's simply a reality of our federal system. We did suggest in our 2015 report that some very small departments might want to collaborate with other departments on things like training, shared equipment, those kinds of things. And I think that does make sense. But even that was, there were eyebrows raised about that because of that sensitivity. And somebody remarked, this is a political issue. Somebody from the White House, in fact, remarked, well, this is a political issue because every mayor wants to have his or her own police chief. And one fact, too, of those 18,000 police departments, fully half of those have 10 or fewer sworn police officers. So that's tiny, tiny agencies, which in some ways is very good because they really know their constituent group. So that's good for community policing. But it's not so good, for example, in being able to have sophisticated training, because they probably have too few people to cover all the shifts if they send half of them away for training. So there are a lot of challenges in this way.
Thank you so much.
Professor Robinson, thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you, Mason Honor College students, for your thoughtful questions and feedback. And thank you all for joining us for Our Future Transformed.